As a teenager, what was the worst thing your parents ever walked in on you doing? I don't know why I did it. But I was 14 and kinda curious. It was late, I didn't think anybody was gonna come down my hallway, so I left my door wide open. I knelt down to the ground, stuck my tongue out, placed it on the wall, and proceeded to lick the wall from the bottom to as high as I could go standing up. I looked to my left and my dad was just standing there with a big-ass smile on his face. He yells out to my mom, "Yo, this weird-ass kid is licking the wall." I still don't understand why I had the urge to do that. That was a weird night. What's something you've experienced that most people never will? I got a girl pregnant about 9 years ago, and when I tried to see my daughter, she fought me every step of the way. No one believed me when I would tell them what was happening. I recorded every phone call and interaction we had for years. About 4 years ago, my daughter was taken from her mother by Department of Human Resources and placed with her grandparents because the mother told them I wasn't in the picture. When I went to DHR and they realized what was going on, they finally placed my daughter with me. After about a month, the mother and the grandparents decided they were going to come get my daughter at all cost. The next morning they tore my front door off the hinges, hurt me in my home, and took my daughter out of her bed. After I called the police, a statewide manhunt involving city, county, and the FBI began for my daughter and the 4 family members that broke into my home. They had driven in 2 separate cars and took 2 separate routes away from my home. About 12 hours later, all 4 had been arrested and extradited back to the city I live in. Fast forward about 2 years. All 4 of the group are now convicted felons. I now have full custody of my daughter and life is pretty awesome. Definitely a unique experience, I think.
My grandma gave me the idea, petty revenge at its finest. Years ago when my husband and I got married, we had a decent-sized wedding, 100 plus people, that we paid for ourselves. Because we were still fairly young and not making a ton of money, I tried to save where I could. I hired local people and friends to do many things at a discounted price, and because I worked at a 4-star restaurant/banquet facility, I was able to talk them into doing the wedding reception for cost as long as I provided a B and C. Basically, we had an amazing wedding for a very low price. However, it was still a fairly large amount per person. Somewhere between 17 to 20 per plate. Not too bad, but not cheap. Anyways, the invites go out and after a bit, the RSVP cards start to pour in and, as I said, we ended up with over 100 plus people, maybe almost 130, that would be attending. My aunt was one of those people. She RSVP'd for her husband, and their son, my cousin. The wedding day comes, we get married, reception time, and my aunt and family is a no-show. I notice because I only have 2. I'm irritated, but more worried something may have happened. However, the following Monday I get a card in the mail from them with a check for $10. No apology, just signed with a small congrats statement. Nothing personal. I was so disappointed. So, I call her mother, my grandma, and I tell her what happened. She instantly says that doesn't even cover the cost of the meals she wasted when she didn't show up. What a cheapskate. It hadn't even crossed my mind at the time. Then she says the best thing ever. You know, your aunt is super OCD about her checkbook. Don't cash that check. It'll drive her mad. I didn't, and it did. It also drove my narcissistic mother crazy because she got all the calls asking when I was going to cash the check. Guess she was too embarrassed by then to call me. A win-win. The best part is I kept the check and left it inside the card. I have a habit of keeping all my cards, and every once in a while I'll pull that card out and look at that check, and it always makes me feel like the pettiest alive.
My, male 35, wife, female 37, told me this morning that she wants a divorce after yesterday's 3-way. My wife and I had a 3-way yesterday with a woman that I know. It was terrible, to tell you the truth. My wife was so awkward and she refused to take off her nightgown amongst other things. She never looked at me once and refused to let me touch or kiss her. The girl, female 29, we had was more relaxed and she tried to make my wife get comfortable. My wife was more receptive to her advances than to me. She just shut me out completely. I only thought it was because it was my wife's first time and that she was awkward. She is a very shy person. Anyway, halfway she just took a more passive role and even didn't let the girl touch her. This morning she told me that the marriage was over and that she wanted a divorce. I asked her if it was because of yesterday and she said yes. I asked her why she didn't tell me that she didn't want the 3-way if she hated it so much that it's ending our marriage. She said our marriage ended the day I suggested the 3-way and that she just wanted to see if it was worth breaking her heart, and said I hope it was worth it. Of course it wasn't worth it. I would have forgot all about it had she said she didn't want it. She did say that she wasn't into having other people when I first suggested it, and I respected that. But then she changed her mind and agreed. My wife and my family are way more important to me than any 3-way. If she didn't want it I would have never brought it up again. I feel played. What do you say to a woman like this? I love her and I don't want to live without her, but she has asked me to move out tomorrow. Bye.
Will never raise a special needs child. I, 15 male, have decided I will never raise a child with special needs. I understand that this makes me sound like a terrible person, but please hear me out. My brother 23 is autistic. My family's entire lives focus around him. We have to change what we eat for him. We can't do certain activities because of him. Everything I do is put on the back burner so that he can have a perfect little life. He barely does anything to help in our house. The few things he does do he constantly complains about. He is rude and interrupts people, especially servers in restaurants. He will sit there and mutter to himself angrily if I'm in the same room as him. He has outbursts if you use the wrong tone or pitch in your voice when you speak. He once punched me in the face when I was 7 when he lost his own iPad. But the worst part is how everyone pretends he's perfect. They all act like he does nothing wrong, like he's Jesus. Everyone uses his autism like a shield, like it makes everything he does okay. So while my oldest sister has moved out and my other sister gets ready to move out, I shoulder all the burdens they used to. I've decided I'm done. When I get married, he won't be there. When I move out, he will not come to my home, and when my parents pass, I won't take care of him. If my sisters don't take him, he will end up in a home and I will finally be free. And if the day comes where one of my children has a mental disability, I will put them up for adoption. I have spent my entire life conforming to my brother's special needs. I will not do that to my own children. I can't wait till the day when I'm free from his shadow.
Pedophile gets entire life ruined. My parents came to the United States in 1987 coming from Zacatecas, Mexico. A few of my uncles and aunts were living here in South Central Louisiana before my parents came. I have in total 5 siblings, 2 sisters and 3 brothers. I am the youngest, now 18 years old. My sister is 3 years older than me, now 21. She was 13 years old at the time of this story. My uncles were gang affiliated and my eldest uncle, now 62, was an amazing tattoo artist, relevant to this story. My dad wasn't a gang member but was well known in our city for participating in gang activity but was never jumped in. One of my uncles threw a party for his daughter's birthday. Practically anyone who wanted in the party was allowed to join in. I no stupid mistake for them. Myself, my brothers, and mother weren't at the party as it was also my mother's sister's birthday and we enjoyed being around her more. But my sisters went with my dad as they were close to my uncle's daughter. My sister was left alone sleeping in my cousin's room since our parties always ended up going until the next morning. The door to my cousin's room did not have a lock. As my sister was sleeping, she felt someone touching her. As she woke up, she realized it was the boyfriend of one of our older cousins, 17, boyfriend was 19 at the time. Nothing was known beyond that until a month later when my sister finally told my mom. Brave of her, since she was only 13. Many people at that age kept quiet for years. By then everyone in my dad's part of the family became aware of this, including my older cousin, the one with the pedophile boyfriend. She was heartbroken but agreed on something with her dad. She set up her then boyfriend into meeting up with her at a local park. My dad along with my uncles and a few members waited at the park at around 9 p.m. Very lonely, barely lit, quiet park. A friend of my uncle known as Santi, rest in peace, had a small RV in which they waited. The piece of shit arrived at the park. That's when my dad and the rest ran up to him and started beating the shit out of him until they dragged him into the RV. Once inside, still continued to beat the shit out of him until they arrived at my uncle's place, the one who did tattoos. Once they arrived, they took him inside where my uncle was ready with all his equipment and gave him some new artwork all over his face, neck, head, and hands. All over he had writing indicating that he was a pedophile, including an extremely big tattoo across his forehead all the way to the right side of his head. They waited until he woke back up, now around 2 a.m. They dumped him in front of his father's house, not to be discovered by neighbors until the sun came out. My father left a heavy, well-written note on the door of the piece of shit dad's house. This led to his dad giving him his own set of beatings and finally kicking him out of his house. Surprisingly, one of his friends let him stay with him for a while until a month after the incident. 2 of his friends were found guilty of a murder charge. Apparently, the murder happened around 3 months before this whole incident. The pedophile was charged with second-degree murder along with a few other charges. He was sent up to Chino Penitentiary. After 2 months in the pen, he was raped, beaten, and finally killed by some African Americans, getting shanked 3 times in his chest by a screwdriver. Not sure if this happened due to his tattoos indicating he was a child predator, or if it was mostly a race thing. Regardless, if any of this didn't happen, he would have still been taken to the pen due to his conviction. So my uncles and father have no guilt for this. My older cousin understandably mourned his death for a while as it was so unexpected for him to turn out to be such a piece of shit in this world. They were together 3 years prior to this incident. As for my sister, she is doing well for herself, currently attending Cal State Long Beach.
My students submitted the most disturbing living history project I've ever seen. One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the bullshit living history assignments we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity. I have been doing this for 17 years, and when I collected the projects this time around, I assumed they would be as dull, if not duller than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class, so I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of I only owned 2 pairs of pants when I was your age and my brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into a neighbor's yard. And of course, these projects were peppered with innocent, old-person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist you just had to laugh. Now, I had a girl in my class whom I will call Olivia. She was pudgy, quiet, and proved herself a consistent B student. I expected her project to be as unremarkable as her, and perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked interview. My screen hiccuped twice before a grainy image of a living room came into view. The place was a hoarder's hell. Olivia was curled up in an armchair clutching a notebook and looking like a scared animal. Across from her sat a man with a somber countenance, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's owlish eyes flashed towards the screen, then back to the man. "I am here with my great-uncle Stephen," she began almost inaudibly. "He is going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." Great-uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a goddamn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for the questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested questions sheet I had handed out to the students. He answered her curtly. Once or twice I heard her mother whisper, "Speak up," Olivia from behind the camera. Typical, boring shit. So I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-uncle Stephen emitted a chain smoker's wheeze. "Nope. Glad to get out of my town though." "Where did you go?" "Balkans." "Uh-huh," she said. I doubted she knew what the Balkans were, and my suspicion was confirmed when she asked, "Was Bacchus very different from here?" "Yes." Mom cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming. But Olivia seemed genuinely interested. "Uncle Stephen," she asked, "what is your very worst memory from the army?" The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray and then slowly lifted himself out of his chair. "I'll be back," he mumbled. The camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same except Great-uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper in plastic sleeves laid atop all the crap sitting on his coffee table. One he held in his hand. "I was a kid when I enlisted," he said, looking at Olivia. "Your brother's age," he told her. Olivia nodded. "I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor for fuck's saw." Mom coughed. Great-uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. "My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved-in rooms, and for some reason, the part that got to me the most was that the school had been like this for years before we got there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by it on their way to go beg for money or whatever shit they did." The camera dipped towards the floor as I heard Mom whisper harshly at Great-uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. "Do you want to hear this goddamn story or not?" I heard him bark in response. "Then you better let me tell it how I want." "Mom," Olivia chimed. "Please stop interrupting. Are you presenting this in front of the class?" "No, Mom, we're just handing it in to the teacher. I'm sure he's heard the word shit before." Great-uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't a he as a matter of fact, but other than that the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. "I'm talking too much anyway," he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. "In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it. So I'm gonna read it now, and then I'll tell you what I saw in that basement." A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed into Great-uncle Stephen and his letter. His palsied hands trembled as he held up the paper. This is what he read. "Dear sir, I never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire, but I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not these attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Nadia suffered for longer. I watched in horror knowing I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day and no one came after me. I doubt they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across a field, visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day and come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried to take Nadia to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home and she died that night, after Nadia and the baby were gone. Well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate and slept, thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting though it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once, even though I didn't listen to the words being said. In fact, the channel I got the clearest was in English, which I don't speak a lick of. But the voices, the music, and the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how long passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course. Since I first holed myself up, it has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some water and food, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was go back to work. So I did. The following morning, I simply returned to the school where I was a janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it. Like I said, Nadia had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciate that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. The teachers never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from my closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know. And the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough not to disrupt the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like it. The schoolhouse is not very big, but does require a lot of maintenance. The floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes. I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around to make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean, but I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups here and there, and I am happy to help. Some days I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio. Other times I handle more serious, structural issues. Days when I have work like this, I feel truly instrumental, like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? It took me a long time, but I once again feel that I have purpose. There is a larder behind the school that is full of preserved food. In lieu of payment, I am allowed to take as much food as I need. That arrangement is fine. What would I do with money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my home, just one field away from the school, but when I started sleeping in the basement, no one seemed to notice. This school is special to me and I cannot leave it unguarded. When I am besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on the radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time, except this morning. Because this morning, I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I have been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I have spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time, I have been crying. I am losing my mind without it. I have given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I am going to take my life. I am writing this because the sunlight is starting to die and I know what my fate shall be. I have thought about taking one last walk through the halls of my school, saying goodbye to the students and teachers. I know I will be missed, but I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no more tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach and I am growing dizzy again, like I did after Nadia died. I am not long for this world, but before I take my life, I have closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It is the only room in the basement and has a small casement that lets in just enough light for me to see what I am doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met with this gruesome sight. Perhaps they will see the door is blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I have placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you are reading this, I have one humble request, please fix it. Save my radio. It did not deserve to die in its sleep and I am ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now I am ready to join Nadia and little Ludmilla in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for it the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. Stanislav. When Mom zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing, Uncle Stephen, Mom said, her voice choked. I think we have enough. Wait, Olivia chirped. He said there's more. What did you find? Before Great Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered that there was a second disc. This one was unmarked, but I hoped it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia's. Hi, Miss Jarity. I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying. But I asked him to continue and secretly recorded the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remember you said earlier this year that history is written by the people who win wars. She sucked in a breath and commenced crying. But everyone's history is important, even if they are sad, pathetic people and even if they never won a single thing in their life. I haven't slept through the night since I finished this project, but you have to hear what my uncle has to say. There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words was beautiful. I was also flattered that she had remembered some trite phrase I threw around because it was what my history teacher said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began again. Fine, came Mom's frustrated voice. If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine, but this is not appropriate for a school project. Let me finish, Great Uncle Stephen snapped. If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen. But Olivia wants to know what happened. I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagined her looking at him expectantly. So did you find the radio? Or did it get ruined when the school got blown up? He rasped and I heard the distinct click of a lighter. That letter, he began slowly, had a date on it. What date? She inquired hungrily. It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school. Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago? Yes, replied Great Uncle Stephen. It had been. There was silence as I felt goosebumps on my arms. The images that came to my mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Great Uncle Stephen put them into words effortlessly. Clearly he had spent his whole life thinking about it. This man, this Stanislav, went to a vandalized, falling apart schoolhouse and cleaned up blood and rubble like it was spilled drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground under them. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained, he must have gotten soaking wet but was so oblivious that he didn't even feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved food that probably tasted like shit. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did you see the dead body? Yes, hanging from the ceiling, but still amazingly lifelike. He wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago. Did he look peaceful? She asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank, and his face was blue and his eyes were bulging. Like this, I imagined him demonstrating. And the radio, Olivia wept. I heard Great Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. It was there, all right, and it was still on.